Hey everyone, welcome to Opportunities in the Functional Mushroom Industry. Going to give everyone a few minutes to filter in before we get started. But this is all kind of fluff at the beginning, so I don't think people are going to miss too much. But we'll give it 1 minute. All right, well, we might as well get rolling here because we've only got an hour. The game plan here is to leave about 10 or 15 minutes towards the end of the hour for a Q&A session. So just type in any questions you have, and hopefully you can get it into the session. I mean, if we don't get to it, feel free to reach out to us afterwards. We got all our contact information here, and hopefully it's a question we can answer. And the slides and the recording will be sent around to the group after this. So if you miss something, or you don't have to take notes because you'll get the slides afterwards. So you can just focus on our scintillating conversation here. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. All right, so this is just about Vicente. So we're cannabis and psychedelic focused law firm. We're not going to be talking about federally illegal products today, though. But that's sort of the background we come out of. So, we're very sort of used to dealing with kind of new, rapidly evolving spaces. We've got offices across the country. And, we sort of got into this space because, with CBD, you had a product that sort of crossed over into the nutraceutical space. And, you have to worry about all the issues that we'll talk about here in terms of, FDA, GMP, GRAS, NDI, all that kind of stuff. So next slide. All right, so I'll let everyone introduce themselves. Sean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sean Hauser. I'm one of the partners and co-chair of the hemp and cannabinoid practice here at Vicente. I've been in the cannabis and psychedelic space for almost 15 years, and much of my practice has focused in the last 5-6 years on the legality of hemp and cannabis and other functional ingredients under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and some of these amended state food and drug acts that have been amended to contemplate hemp and other new ingredients, and look forward to the conversation today.
Excellent. And Chris.
Yeah, hi everybody. Chris Clausen with First Person. We're a cognitive optimization company that has a consumer brand, and we also have a functional mushroom farm where we grow primarily lion's mane mushroom and do an extraction that we do sell then at the B2B market.
Awesome. And I'm Charlie Albacetti. I partner at Vicente. I run the corporate group here. My practice is mostly focused on corporate governance, M&A, venture financings in the cannabis and psychedelic industries, but increasingly helping some functional mushroom companies as well. And I like to say during COVID, I kind of switched to a virtual life, and I pretend to be in Massachusetts, Colorado, and New York simultaneously, covering those cannabis markets. Okay, so we'll just these are kind of the three topics we're going to cover. There's also a section on sourcing functional mushrooms. So we'll get started with functional adaptogenic mushrooms, which I'll cover, and of course, if you guys want to hop in, please. So this is just kind of 101 for those who are not sort of familiar with the space or are interested in it. All right, so I think I like to use functional adaptogenic as synonyms, basically, partially because we're when you're doing a webinar or writing an article, you're worrying about SEO, and I don't want someone to miss something just because they use one word other than the other. but there is it is sort of a Venn diagram situation, where the broader circle is functional, the bigger circle is functional, and then within functional you've got adaptogenic. Adaptogenic meaning it helps the body with stress and fatigue, and then functional just seeing sort of boosting health. So obviously, if you're improving your stress and fatigue tolerance, you are boosting your health. And then, of course, adaptogenic can mean it's not limited to sort of supplements or foods, right? Things like exercise can be adaptogenic in that it helps your body handle stress and fatigue. But so let's not worry too much about which term we use, but I found it sort of confusing when I first entered the space. So I guess why mushrooms, right? I mean, I think mushrooms are having sort of a cultural moment right now in the US, for a few reasons. One of which has been obviously sort of the legalization in Oregon and Colorado of psilocybin, the psychedelic, or a psychedelic mushroom. And that's one thing that I think drives interest in mushrooms, but it's both trendy and ancient at the same time. Trendy in that, you do see like these trends arise in the wellness space of, at one point in time, there was Psy was a hot topic. Trying to think of some other ones that were, bone broth was another one I remember everyone was talking about. And now to some extent it's mushrooms, but it's not just a flash in the pan. I mean, I think that I'd have to double check this, but I mean, mushrooms being consumed to improve your health is the documentation of it goes back as far as we have documentation of these kind of things. If you're talking about traditional Chinese medicine. So it's not it's, I don't think you should view it in the same way as, maybe acai, not to badmouth acai, but you can see the market is growing. And then the dietary supplement industry in the United States is already pretty significant. Of course you could quote, different people give different numbers, but I've seen 46 billion in the US. So let's just say that's a big chunk of change. And then the market right now, 3 billion for mushrooms, and hopefully that'll have room to grow. And obviously there's sort of the functional adaptogenic mushroom space, but I mean, there's also, the truffle mushroom space, which we're not really going to talk about, but, mushrooms, there's kind of like a gourmet food side of mushrooms, which is different than the health side, which is obviously a massive, strange kind of industry, which we won't go too into. Okay, next. All right, so one thing I love about functional mushrooms is that it is completely federally legal. Having lived in a world of federal illegality for so long, I've kind of grown numb to the challenges, but the reality is that operating a state legal but federally legal business can be frustrating. You run into banking problems, you run into payment processing problems, and then there's 280E, which is just an absolute nightmare from a financial perspective. Now, people will tell you, just because you're a functional mushroom company doesn't mean that some payment processor isn't going to sort of accuse you of violating federal law. So I think there's an education component when you're working with financial institutions. And of course, this is something we could help people with, right? Like, it's very easy to write an opinion saying that this functional mushroom company is complying with the Controlled Substances Act, right? So you could get a legal opinion. We give like a letter or a call or something like that. That'd be a way we could help people. But anyway, it's totally legal. So, and this is the first webinar I've ever done about a totally legal substance. So that's exciting. Next slide. All right, so these are just different types of mushrooms that, well, I'm not going to get too into. I have an article about this on our website if you're curious, but I mean, there's a million of these articles online if you want to look them up. I mean, this is just sort of like my sort of look into it. And, of course, there are research studies for all these mushroom types, including randomized control trials. I don't think I'm not aware of any sort of meta-analysis of RCTs when it comes to these mushrooms. So we're not at that sort of like highest level of evidence. And these studies are, generally are smaller too. But this is not just, observational sort of like fly-by-night science. Like there is actually pretty strong data that indicates that there could be benefits of, each of these types of mushrooms. So, like the big ones you hear about, like we'll just talk about two, like reishi and lion's mane. Reishi obviously is like one that has a strong background in, they call it traditional medicine, but, ancient medicine, or it's just been used for a very long time, and it still is used. I was reading that, in China, they will give cancer patients supplements containing reishi. So that one probably is the strongest research behind it. Lion's mane less so, but also, used in traditional medicine, and has, potentially significant health benefits. There is research, but, more research needs to be done to get to that sort of like higher level of evidence. But there is very promising studies to start with. So, and then we'll go through the other ones. So cordyceps, the next one, turkey tail, chaga, and shiitake. Well, shiitake is obviously edible. But these are the kind of the big six of the functional mushroom space. I'm sure we'll probably see more. There's a huge number of fungi in the world, and I'm pretty sure they're still discovering a lot of them. So it's a pretty exciting space. And we talk about, obviously, on the farming side, there's a lot of, much like cannabis, there's going to be a tremendous amount of advances, I think, in a short period of time here as the interest grows. So the last thing I'll say here is that one of the current hot topics in the industry you should be aware of is that there are really two different ways you can produce mushroom supplements. And this is for supplements really more so than food, because I'm not aware of anyone eating mycelium. But to produce a mushroom supplement, you can basically do it two ways. One, you can grow mycelium on a substrate like rice, or two, you can grow it to that next level, where you get the actual, what we call a mushroom, which is the fruiting body. So they're partisans on both sides of this issue. We're going to hear from Chris, who's clearly on one side here, but I'm just going to kind of try and do my attempt to fairly present each side here. So the Mycelium people, I mean, the big one here is Paul Stamets, who's obviously a big name in the space. You can read his link. I mean, I think he'll also argue, my understanding of what he's saying is that he's not necessarily defending all mycelium supplements, but he thinks that way he produces it, or the way his company produces it, it's not necessarily the same as just using filler if you're using a good substrate. But, I'm not a farmer here, so I'm not going to get too into that. But the thing about mycelium is, like, it is faster. It's easy to grow year round, arguably. I mean, I think it's probably environmentally friendlier. They argue that it's the immune system of mushrooms and therefore better suited for supplements. So that's the argument on the other side of mycelium. And go to the next slide, and we get to the, in defense of the fruiting bodies. And here, of course, they haven't measured, they typically don't measure all the compounds right in mushrooms, but the big one is beta glucan. And that is, is really in the mushroom, in the fruiting body. There's no starch, which can arise with the mycelium production. And then most of the research here is based on the fruiting bodies. So, if you're relying on the science so far, what's good for taking the fruiting body may not also apply to mycelium. And I've included a link here to the argument on this side from a company called Namex. Again, the argument here is a lot based on labeling, right? So, their sort of argument is that if you're buying a mushroom supplement, you should know how it was produced. Next slide. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna sort of talk to Chris here a little bit and get an operator's perspective on growing, sourcing functional mushrooms. So, Chris, what do you think about the debate between mycelium and fruiting bodies?
Oh, I think it's pretty clear cut as far as the labeling issue goes. Hopefully that will be resolved pretty soon. Just the transparency in the industry, we really should be declaring whether that's mycelium, that also includes a substrate, whether it's rice or oats or sorghum. or it's a fruiting body, which doesn't include that. The tests that show that when you take a mycelionated grain block and basically you freeze dry it and grind it up into a powder and then put it into a supplement, that those tests are coming back that ends up being 90% starch. So 90 up to potentially 90%, just kind of like flour versus mushroom. So and you know, in your supplement size, if you take that down, take 90% of it away, are you getting very much benefit just from the mycelium, even the benefits that are in the mycelium, which the mycelium does have some benefits. I'm not saying it doesn't. Whereas a pure fruiting body, and particularly a fruiting body extract, all the benefits are going to be there. There's no filler, there's no grain, there's no starch, but more importantly, there's medicinal compounds that are only found in the fruiting body. And particularly in lion's mane for brain health purposes. The herniciones are only in a fruiting body. So you just kind of know what the application of that is for your product. I do think that consumer education is growing, and people are becoming more aware of this, and the days of just being able to buy a supplement in bulk because it's less expensive, those days are going to go away as the consumer demand starts leaning towards these fruiting bodies, particularly these extracts.
And I guess, could you tell us a little bit about, you know, because you grow mushrooms at your farm. Could you tell us a little bit about the, you know, just the world of mushroom farming at a high level, I guess?
Yeah, it's an adventure. You hear it all the time. Hey, just grow your own mushrooms, which you can do that, and people do that at home, and it is simple, but it's not easy, particularly as you go at scale. It starts to definitely get more complicated, but we have about 12,000 square foot of space in the Pacific Northwest where we grow lion's mane. We're also working on cordyceps and reishi and trying to get those things tweaked out just right so we can grow it at scale. But you know, just growing, you know, farming and growing any food, there are challenges. Everything is temperature controlled indoors. The reason we're in the Pacific Northwest is because mushrooms love it up there. It's mostly the right temperature most of the time anyway, so we don't have to do a lot of heating and cooling of our greenhouses to keep it at the right space. But it is a constant it's constant work. Mushrooms need babysit every day. They need to be tended. It's not a set and forget. So it is quite a undertaking to grow your own mushrooms, but can be quite rewarding. The reason we did it is because we were looking for a organic North American fruiting body extract that and it really didn't exist at scale. So we knew for what we wanted to do for our own products, as far as taking that extraction technique, we have some ideas, and we've implemented some ideas around you know, a proprietary extraction technique to fully release the medicinal compounds from the cell walls. The mushrooms are made of chitin. The cell walls are chitin, which is like the same thing that's on a shellfish or the shrimp, and most humans can't break that down, don't have the enzyme to break that down in your body, which is why you would need an extract. So we break down that cell wall, release the medicinal compounds so that it's bioavailable to humans. Whereas if you just took a mushroom, dried it, ground it up, and ingested it, you're not going to be able to get the full benefit from that mushroom. Now, like if you take some of these products where you see, hey, just here's a bunch of mushrooms and make a tea out of it, that is a little bit of an extraction technique, a hot water extraction, so you'll get some of it that way. But we need help getting the benefits out of the mushrooms through extraction. So it's really important, if you're looking at a product, to go ahead and look at the extraction method and getting that extracted for your customers' benefit and for yourself if you're looking to take the product.
So, I mean, I guess, do your supplements typically use your own mushrooms? Do you also have other people's mushrooms in there, or?
Correct. So at the farm, we've concentrated primarily on lion's mane. Our products out now also have cordyceps extracts and reishi extracts. Those we do get from Namex. We do like Jeff Chilton and his company in Namex, and they do produce excellent products. They are come from China. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but we're trying to get our sourcing in North America, which is why we built it ourselves. So yeah, right now it's a blend. We hope to build the scale on those other two mushrooms so that we could supply our own products for those as well.
And so I guess, do you have a sense of, are most mushroom, I mean, I would imagine that most supplement companies are going out there and buying from third parties because of the cost.
Yeah, it would have to be all of them. There's not a lot of them that are actually growing their own mushrooms.
Yeah.
Many vertical integrated companies out there.
So when you're going out there and trying to source a good mushroom farmer, what things are you looking for there?
If you're looking for a supplement, you're looking for you're really looking for, in my opinion, you're looking for fruiting body extracts. That would be the highest level. Now they're going to be more expensive than buying a mycelionated grain block that's ground up. The reason for that is because you can mycelionate a grain block in about 3 weeks, where to grow the fruiting body off of takes about 2 to 3 months of time. So there's a lot more space and labor and effort involved into that, in handling of the mushrooms and being able to get those from a fresh fruiting body to a dried powder in an efficient manner without having any waste. So it is a more expensive product, but it is a more efficacious product. And it just kind of depends on where you're at. If you're looking in the supplement industry or you're in it, that increase in price, although by a kilo, maybe like that's tremendous, but if you break it down per serve on your supplements, it's really not adding that much cost to go with a far superior product.
And I guess from the perspective of a supplement manufacturer, right, that's trying to find like the right farmer to work with, like when you decided to work with Namex, what was your, what kind of criteria are you thinking about when you're evaluating the farmer?
Yeah, there's not a lot. That was the other issue. That was why one of the reasons we decided to build our own is there's not a lot of sources out there. There's only a handful of at scale that can keep up with the demand, particularly the growing demand of functional mushrooms and the growing demand of lion's mane. One of our concerns was we were going to have trouble even sourcing it, because there's not a lot of fruiting body extracts out there. And in North America, there's only a handful of people that are doing this. The biggest ones are doing mycelionated grain, so that eliminated them from our criteria right away. And then the next one was, looking at their studies and looking at the safety data on what they've done and saying, okay, Namex does take time to do these things right. There's some concern on just buying directly from China at a company that doesn't have the due diligence of Namex, that mushrooms absorb their environment. One of the other reasons we're located next to the Capitol Forest in the Pacific Northwest is because if you're growing mushrooms in an industrial area, unless you've really highly filtered that outside air coming into your grow environment, the mushrooms will take on all those heavy metals and toxins and just absorb them into the mushrooms, and those end up in your product. So it's important where they're grown and that they're grown in a clean surrounding as well.
Cool, great. Well, thank you. So I think moving on now to the regulation of, and of course, like you said, type in any questions, because we'll have questions at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean to talk about how functional mushrooms are regulated and, in short, how to stay out of trouble.
Thanks, Charlie. And to kind of riff off, some of what's been said, I think, part of the increased popularity in mushrooms, like Chris said, is the the education that's happened around the benefits of mushrooms from under FDA, what's called structure function, meaning not a used to treat a disease or a medical condition, but rather the structure and function of the body. So a claim that's to be allowed on a dietary supplement. So as far as, you know, day-to-day stress versus an anxiety disorder, and also the benefits for, you know, medical conditions, you know, everything from turkey tail to cancer, turkey tail's efficacy for cancer, and, you know, other benefits of various mushrooms on medical conditions. And thinking about regulating any product that's sold in a consumer good, you know, the core principles of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act are grounded on consumer safety and protections. So ensuring products don't have false and misleading claims, meaning if your product, you know, hasn't gone through the safety studies to be sufficient for use as a drug, then they can't make those claims. And if your product is claiming that it's safe and efficacious for, you know, a structure function for stress, then, you know, that safety data needs to be there, and the FDA regulatory framework outlines what's required for a drug claim versus structure function claim, or for a product to be in the food supply, and mushrooms are treated with others. And like with folks have seen in the hemp industry and others, the FDA has sent warning letters to mushroom companies making unlawful medical claims, you know, around the products being effective for medical conditions where the safety studies not such. From a consumer perspective, that could be also misleading. Can we go to the next slide? So we're largely looking at, in the mushroom space, regulation as a food or dietary supplement. And like I said, to be in either, the substance must meet the FDA safety standards. And the basic components, like I said, are no misbranding, no adulteration. So a product is misbranded if it has, like I said, unapproved claims, or if it has an inaccurate label, and where it's adulterated, so it contains an ingredient that poses a significant or unreasonable risk of illness or injury. So an easy example is in the cannabis space, because THC is federally legal and hasn't been considered recognized as safe or anything other than a drug. The federal FDA would consider any food or dietary supplement ingredient with THC to be de facto adulterated. And to not be considered adulterated as a food, you have to be, the ingredients to be generally recognized as safe or approved as a food additive. And with a dietary supplement, the standard is similar, but a little bit of a lower bar. The supplement is considered adulterated if it contains a dietary ingredient or a new dietary ingredient, and I'll explain the difference, for which there is inadequate information as to whether or not it presents a significant or unreasonable illness in any country. So we'll start with foods, and, you know, many of these products are products. So a food product to be sold in interstate commerce must be generally recognized as safe for a food additive. And to be generally recognized as safe, it requires a reasonable certainty of safety, and there's a specific FDA standard, and there's third-party companies that can, you know, help with the GRAS standard. They can either be done by a company independently through one of these companies, or formally approved by FDA. And there's a number of GRAS for mushrooms that you can look at as an example for what standards FDA has deemed sufficient, and, you know, what studies they consider legitimate. And a substance is GRAS under the conditions of its intended use is not a food additive, and there's no pre-market review by FDA required. So if you have a GRAS dossier that shows that your ingredient for the condition of your intended use, how you're marketing it, is GRAS, then you don't have to get any sort of pre-approval before putting it on the market. Next slide. So the way you can get GRAS for a food substance is by two means. One, the scientific procedures I was referencing, to adequately show through scientific procedures that it's safe under the conditions of intended use. So that means the specific dose in your particular ingredient for the claim you're intending. So if you're saying stress and relaxation, the studies need to show both safety and efficacy for that use and at the dose of your product. You can't use a general study, saying a reishi mushroom generally supports stress. You have to look at the specific dose and products. The other and often used means is through common use. If the ingredient has been commonly used in the diet of man in the food supply prior to 1958, then it is considered GRAS, and you just have to show that there was a legitimate and substantial history of consumption by a significant number of consumers. And a little bit more about the scientific procedures. Again, you can't just have a general study. There must be, a legitimate scientific study with a consensus of expert opinion regarding the safety. It must be widely known, and they must be qualified experts, and there must be a reasonable certainty of no harm. So you need to be including in the studies adverse events and all the conditions that would support the reasonable certainty of no harm. And there's great companies that can support GRAS determinations and can help guide through sorting out what studies are going to set you up for success and compliance. And the three categories of data for no harm, they're going to look at the toxicological studies, dietary exposure assessment, and the characteristics of the specific ingredient, including chemical structure composition. And so again, you don't necessarily need to get FDA approval and go through a formal process to achieve GRAS status. There's three ways you can legitimately have it. The first is a self-affirmed GRAS using your own resources and internal research. Often with the self-affirmed GRAS, folks will still engage a third-party expert or consultant, and that person can work with the company for determination, all through the outside expert. The third option is submitting a GRAS notification to FDA and going through the full pre-market notification and getting a formal no objection letter. This has some obvious benefits for investors or the public if you're trying to prove and with purchasers in the supply chain that this is a truly legal ingredient and set yourself apart. But there are three pathways, all considered very legitimate and all used commonly in practice. So once an ingredient is GRAS, it is legal to be sold in interstate commerce. But like I said, it's specific to the substance and intended use. You can't rely on the GRAS in another product if your product has a different dose and is used in another context or is for a different use. And the dietary supplement bar standard is a bit different, but similar basic fundamental that the product needs to be safe for its intended use to be sold in interstate commerce. And like with foods, there's specific labeling, safety, manufacturing, product safety requirements for dietary supplements. And just to be clear on what a dietary supplement is, it's usually pretty obvious with many of the mushroom products, but it does have to fall within the definition to be regulated as a dietary supplement and to fit within that framework. So it's a product that is intended for ingestion, supplements the diet, and that's different from food, which is used for its nutritive value, and has or contains one or more of the following ingredients: a vitamin, mineral, an herb or botanical, amino acid, a dietary supplement to supplement the diet to increase dietary intake, or concentrate, metabolite, constituent, or extract. And these products can only be in certain forms. A vaporizer is not a dietary supplement, for example. Neither is a topical cream. There are these specific forms: tablets, capsules, powders, soft gels, certain liquids. They can't be represented as a conventional food, so they can't be presented as having nutritive value. It's to supplement the diet. And they can't include a substance approved or investigated as a new drug unless that substance was on the market prior to that drug being approved. So this is the drug preclusion, which is made famous by CBD. So the reason the FDA has said it can't regulate CBD is because Epidiolex, the CBD-based drug, was approved arguably before CBD was ever marketed meaningfully in a supplement or food. And with many of these mushrooms, they have been in the food supply and the diet for a long time, but it requires proving they've been marketed as such. And if someone finds a novel mushroom and pursues a drug trial, that could preclude that same ingredient, that same mushroom ingredient being regulated as a food or dietary supplement if that drug trial comes first. And the purpose of that provision is to preserve the pharmaceutical pathway of investing $10 million in years into research. And it's a controversial provision, at least in the health space. And FDA has and will consider a product to be misbranded if it is marketed as a dietary supplement, but does not fit to that definition or is not one of those product forms. And they have issued warning letters to that effect in the mushroom space. So the dietary supplements, like with foods, there's sort of this common use or old dietary ingredient. Sounds like a wrapper, ODI exception. So under the dietary supplement provision, if an ingredient was marketed in the United States prior to October 1994, which is when DSHEA was passed, you can use them in dietary supplements without doing a new dietary ingredient notification. You just have to have evidence of that prior use, and then it's deemed a full dietary ingredient. If it's a new dietary ingredient post 94, a company is required to submit a notification to FDA at least 75 days before introducing it into commerce. And that notification will include the evidence that it's reasonably safe under its conditions of intended use and as labeled. There is an exception for dietary ingredients that are existing in the food supply, used for food, meaning they're already grass in food and they're not chemically altered for that form. So there's sort of a grass exemption, a food exemption to dietary supplementation. And again, you have to show evidence to that effect and that there's been no chemical alteration of any kind. And so in looking at an ingredient, it's obviously to look at where does it fall under as far as food and dietary supplements, and how am I marketing it, and are my claims consistent with my product category? Again, you cannot make a drug claim that either of these products, foods or dietary supplements, can be used to treat a disease or medical condition. And to make a structure function claim for a dietary supplement, that needs to be supported by your safety studies, and you need to have a GRAS or an NDI on file. So with mushrooms and looking at whether you need to file an ODI or NDI, you look at the species, the life stage, how the ingredient is processed, and if you're unable to establish that that ingredient was the same article that was in the food supply and not chemically altered, then you do need to do the GRAS and market the ingredient consistent with the GRAS use in a conventional food product before marketing and selling to their stakeholders. Or you need to submit the new dietary ingredient notification with that safety data. And a couple of just fundamental requirements I mentioned on FDA and FTC. Labeling cannot be false and misleading, and they must comply with the product type requirements. If you look at warning label or warning letters and enforcement actions by FDA on functional mushrooms and other dietary supplements, you'll see they have limited resources. They're focusing on products that they deem a real threat to public health and safety. And it's when products purport to cure life-threatening illnesses like COVID and cancer, and they're not substantiated to do such because they haven't been researched and studied to be efficacious as drugs, then they will take action, and that's the easiest way to get warning letter and bad press. And it's important to make sure your products are compliant, you're not making drug claims, and that any structure functional claims you are making are substantiated. And the NAMX letter has been mentioned, so I won't go too far into it, but I think it's a really interesting debate and one that's underscores the importance of labeling and consumer knowledge and trust. You'll see there's FDA guidance around labeling for use in food and specific with mushrooms. There are compliance policy guidance been around since 76 on mushrooms, says any food in which mushroom mycelium is used should be labeled to state that fact, and labeling should not suggest or imply that the food contains mushrooms. And I think it's important to understand that depending on the stage of growth or parts used, and the FDA emphasizes this, the fungi may contain different levels of medical constituents, and they require that part to be listed in the supplement pack panel because that's important for a consumer. And they encourage certainty in identifying the stage of the fungal organism and labeling it appropriately. And although FDA enforcement resources are limited, like I mentioned, I think we can expect that with the category growth, there can be, there will likely be increased scrutiny here, and labeling compliance and consumer safety is targeted.
Sean, if we could just move on if we could speed up. Sorry.
No. We can skip over the NAMX because I think we covered it earlier. So this is the last piece. So yeah.
All right. So we go to the last slide. Okay. So back to Chris here, talk about sort of the business side of things. Just to start off, curious to get your view on, starting a new brand, right, in what's a very crowded marketplace. What are your thoughts, and what's the kind of the key to sort of getting attention?
Well, yeah, like you said, mushrooms are having a moment right now, with the interest in both functional mushrooms and psychedelic mushrooms. It's definitely in the zeitgeist right now. So it is a great time to be joining that industry for sure. The challenges, are really that, there's a lot of, I would say have an intent, so what's your intent? Our intent is to concentrate on having a better brain for now and in the long run, function better now and in the long run. A lot of this just lumping mushrooms into together and saying it's good for you. It does work at some level, although the different mushrooms, and as the research starts to come in, you're going to see it be there's going to be biotech advancements into the mushroom world is already happening behind the scenes. So right now, the industry is still very nascent. And so it's just like people are selling mushrooms for mushroom's sake. But as it starts to get refined and we start to know more about these medicinal compounds, now we know about so let's say a dozen or so different medicinal compounds in functional mushrooms, although they think that there could be up to 20,000 different medicinal compounds in functional mushrooms that have benefits for health and wellness. And with the advent of AI, that's going to accelerate the discovery of this and potentially even the isolation or at least the boosting of the percentages of those medicinal compounds. And that's really going to change the game as far as what people are looking for their specific needs. It's due too. So, cordyceps for VO2 max and endurance, there's some real anecdotal data behind that. But as we start to see the scientific data catch up with that, that's really going to expand that whole sports nutrition market. And you're going to see cordyceps come into the sports world a lot more than it is right now. And there's a lot of opportunities there. So, if you're getting into it, I would say focus on something that, has an intent for the purpose and not just be mushrooms for mushrooms' sake.
And just talk about like channel distribution here. Could you share your thoughts on, selling functional mushrooms? Where are the primary channels that people are using to sell these mushrooms? I imagine a lot of it is direct to consumer. And then I think, you would, health or supplement stores have probably, my guess would be just in the internet age fallen off. And then of course, something like, a third party site like Amazon. So I just curious.
Yeah, you go into, a Whole Foods or Sprouts or any of those, the supplement aisle is challenging because it's the most crowded. If you look, it's probably the least visited, and it tends to add high ticket items to a grocery cart where you're already spending a significant amount of money, and you're going to drop something in there on top of your $250 in groceries, and you're going to add another $50 or $30 an item, and then all of a sudden you're at $300-400. And what did I do? So, our approach has been, because our brand, First Person, relies a lot on consumer education around the ingredients, around the product, and around its intended use. And that's also hard to do in a retail setting when you've just got a package sitting there competing against everybody else. So we focused primarily on direct to consumer for our initial products, although we have had some inbounds and have entertained the thought of going into some select retail locations. But there are definite challenges to that. Amazon, in my opinion, used to be the place where people would validate the brand from seeing it on social media. But that's not necessarily the case anymore. I would say 5 to 10 years ago, you would need to be on Amazon just to validate that you're a legitimate company. But I don't see people really doing that as much anymore. And the challenges of, the consumer education, and if you're a brand, owning your consumer and being able to communicate them after the purchase, you lose that on Amazon. So that ends up also developing a line of challenges for you. But the DTC market right now, particularly with Meta and TikTok, is very strong. It does require a lot of manpower and effort to pull it off. But if you do it right, you will get returns.
Great. That's a great segue into my next question, is thinking about sort of advertising, right? So, like what channels, I guess, what platforms do you think do you use for advertising, and what do you think are sort of the most amenable for supplements in general?
Yeah, it's very broad. Podcasts are excellent as well. And the podcast market just continues to grow as far as listeners and being a source of information for everybody versus what used to be television or even clicking on news stories online. Social media, once again, is a very, very powerful tool. And blogs and influencers. There's a whole broad strategy in order to launch a product and hit your target demographic that we still haven't even touched at all, just because there's so many options and you have a limited amount of capital to put towards each one, but we will continue to test all these different things. But podcasts have been successful. Social media has also been very good for us.
Well, I guess I'll throw in an obligatory pitch for my colleagues' podcast, We Wonks. If anyone's looking for a podcast, it is pretty focused on cannabis regulations, which I realize is a niche audience. So let's move to Q&A here. I don't know if I could. Yeah, well, let's see, Sean, we got a question here that's probably for you. Testing methodologies and technology have changed significantly, improved since the 80s. How can we prove a chemical profile has not changed when that profile was likely not well known or proven prior to the changes in the dietary supplement regulation?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot has changed and improved, but there's still a lot to be improved in testing with mushrooms and what's being measured and how they're labeled. So I don't know. I think you would have to look at the available results from the date you had it, compare it with the new testing methodologies now, and see whether there's similarities and differences.
Yeah, it sounds like this is one of these questions where it's not like a simple yes or no, right? Like you kind of have to muddle through this one, right?
Yeah, and it would maybe, you would have to look at the specific testing requirements and what, I think different labs now have different capacities for what that. So
I think the one way to look at that would be not to has it changed or improved. It's that the testing methods are just now coming online. So you're not going to be able to compare it in the past when we're just now getting to the point where we can test for some of these medicinal compounds. And that's really where the whole industry is moving towards. Like our interest in herniciones in the lion's mane, we really haven't been able to test our own product yet, although we're working with companies to get that done, to develop the assays, to be able to actually do these tests so that you could say, okay, here's a fruiting body extract, and here's the medicinal compounds of interest, and here's a mycelionated grain block, and do they compare? And we really haven't been able to do that yet, but we're really close. Should be sometime this year or early next year that some of these advanced testing is going to come online in the mushroom industry.
Cool. So here's a question that I think we can talk a little bit about. What do you think of what's going on in the psychedelic mushroom supplements, i.e. selling it openly online and at retail without recourse, similar to what is happening with hemp-derived Delta-9 space? So I'll give my view and then let everyone else chime in here. So I'd say, first off, I don't know if it's necessarily the same as the hemp-derived Delta-9 space, because with hemp-derived Delta-9, I think you've got an argument that it's excluded from the Controlled Substances Act if it's derived from something that qualifies as hemp under the 2018 Farm Bill. So, that, while I'm not saying that it's totally kosher, you've got a colorable claim. The people that are selling, some of whom are friends, so I'm not trying to get in trouble, but the people that are selling psilocybin supplements openly, I don't think have any kind of colorable claim under federal law that what they're doing is legal. But more importantly, because again, our view is that we're pro-regulation, right? You have to be following some sort of regulated regime. It's also not really legal at the state level in any way, shape, or form. Even a state like Colorado or Oregon that have legalized psilocybin to some extent, right, have not, you would need a license in Oregon to create a brand, and, it's limited. You can't sell it. It has to be consumed on site. And in Colorado, the current personal use exemption would not encompass, the creation of a brand, because to me, a brand is by definition not for personal consumption. Why would you brand something you make for yourself? It makes no sense. So, they're essentially just gambling that there will be no enforcement. Which, I think, the risk there, who knows? But I mean, to the bigger your enterprise gets, and, the second you start going multi-state, your risk goes up exponentially. That's not legal advice. Anyone else want to chime in?
No, I agree with everything you said. I think the clear federal legality of the Controlled Substances Act and other state laws is the core risk.
Yeah, I agree too. I mean, there are people attempting to do workarounds through membership in psychedelic churches and things like that, which may or may not hold ground. But there is a lot of people just openly selling it. And that's growing all the time tremendously. It's amazing. The brazen, just right on Instagram or even LinkedIn, openly selling psychedelics is quite amazing to me.
Yeah, and in Toronto, I know that a bunch of stores have opened up.
Yeah.
So just similar to New York, right, where you've got like a massive amount of totally illegal storefront retail for cannabis. Got time for, I think, one last question here, and I'm gonna go with Cole's question because it's, I think, a simpler question. There's a lot of cannabis discussion here, which just reality of our backgrounds. What similarities do you see between the industries, and do you believe the mushroom industry may experience the same headwinds that cannabis is facing? I would say, yeah, Chris or Sean, you want to do the first answer here?
Yeah, I'll just say let's just take it back to functional mushrooms, and let's take that comparable away from THC down to CBD, and so I think there is a threat. I think CBD had its moment, whatever, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and then all of a sudden there's 10,000 people creating CBD everything, where you go into 7-Eleven and there's CBD gummies at the checkout stand, CBD everywhere, and it starts to dilute the belief in the consumer, and then it starts to hurt the whole industry, and then that power of the consumer buying it starts to go away, and everybody starts to go away with it. So there is a threat here in functional mushrooms, that the excitement behind mushroom creates mushroom everything, and just putting mushroom, I think kind of, and forgive me if you're out there, but there's one in Colorado that was a CBD functional marshmallow. And I think that's the jump the shark moment for putting CBD into things. But mushrooms are kind of trending that way. And I just don't know if we need to put mushroom in every health product or every potential health and wellness product just for the sake of doing that. I think it will end up confusing the consumer and going down the same path as CBD.
Yeah, those are great points, Chris, and I totally agree. And I would add that there are some parallels also in that some of these mushroom and cannabis ingredients may have the safety profiles to be, in foods and dietary supplements, and others might have psychoactive, intoxicating effects and don't. And basic fundamentals of product safety and understanding, the intended effect and potential effects of these products is important in how they're going to be categorized and what your liability is. And that the same regulatory agency at the federal level, it's the FDA, they have limited enforcement resources, and kind of these same errors in making medical claims are going to be the low hanging fruit. But they're, like with cannabis, there's this burgeoning state market. But with mushrooms, it's very limited as to what's legal. And like Charlie said, right now it's very much limited to personal use and use in healing centers. Although that was certainly involved.
And I'll just say one last thing quickly before we end is that, my view is that like you have to take even a step even further back and think, okay, well, what's the success rate of your average startup? Just in general, new companies fail all the time. It's tough to build. It's incredibly difficult to build a business. So, you're going to see, in any new industry, you're going to see a ton of businesses, and then, it shakes out over time. I mean, and of course, after the fact, everyone's going to act like it was obvious who was going to win. But, in the moment, it can be difficult to tell what's going to happen. So I think a lot of industries will see, what we're seeing with cannabis, which is, a peak, and then, it goes down. Like I remember, I always say it's like pets.com versus Chewy, which is, one was too early and one is a successful company. A lot of this stuff can be just timing and luck. But, no matter, I think the one thing you can count on is that there'll be a lot of sort of failures along the way, unfortunately. All right.
And if folks have other questions, definitely feel free to email any of us. All the information is right here. There's a lot of great questions here, and the opportunity to answer. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you,
everyone.
guys. Thanks for having me.